Well, howdy, Smite fans, it's J-Mac here. Week number 7 had some pretty intense sets, but before I cover those, I just need to give you guys a little bit of an update in case you did miss out this week. We had a little bit of roster drama happen. I'm going to try and cover that as briefly as I can. For the Jade Dragons, Sanford Soccer has been removed from the team, and it's now Scream going to be stepping in his place, but that's not going to take place until week 8. For this week, they have Sino replacing him in the jungle. Does that leave for the Solar Scarabs? Well, that means that they're going to be using Oath, at least for now, in week number 7, with an undetermined jungler in week number 8. Now that that's been covered, let's go ahead and talk about week 7 of the SPL in this week's episode of the SPL Weekly Recap. And to start out week number 7, we had the Camelot Kings against the Jade Dragons. Both games this set went to nearly 40 or so minutes of play, and was a close match between both squads. But when it came down to the team fighting late game, the Camelot Kings were able to come out on top. The Dragons, fighting at large deficits both times, kept the games interesting, but the Kings reeled it in for a 2-0 win. And then our second set of the week was the Olympus Bolts against the Atlantis Leviathans. An unorthodox pick for the Levi's in both games for Shinto, piloting Kabrakan, raised some eyebrows, but it paid off for the Leviathans as Panatom led the charge to control the early game for the Levi's. And that momentum carried the Levi's through the mid and late game, netting them a 2-0 victory over the Olympus Bolts. And kicking off our Saturday, we had the Oni Warriors against the Valhalla Valkyries. There isn't too much to say about game number 1 except that the Warriors just utterly annihilated the Valks, blanking them 19-0 for a game 1 win. Then in game number 2, we see a completely new Valkyries. A Morrigan Ratatosker combo out of Benny and Kirmi held such a commanding presence across the map. Between the double global and the heavy CC, the Valks picked up game number 2 to tie up the set. In game number 3's buzzword was pressure, and the Valks had that in spades. Every single lane pulled to an early lead, and even despite only 3 kills going down in the first 15 minutes of play, the farm game of the Valkyries gave them just enough of a lead to push back against the Warriors. And it's the Valhalla Valkyries who found their first set win of phase number 2 with a 2-1 over the Oni Warriors. To round out our second day of the weekend, we had the Tardis Titans and the Solar Scarabs. The Titans, facing a subbed jungler for the Solar Scarabs, made for a pretty quick matchup in the Titans' favor. 2 sub-25-minute games for the Titans show that they're still a top team to contend with. An unfortunate loss for the Scarabs, but one they shouldn't beat themselves up on given the situation. It's a 2-0 for the Tardis Titans to take the win. Now, given the situation with the Dragons and the Scarabs, we're not going to be having that game this week. That's going to be postponed to week 8. So instead, for our only 2 sets on Sunday, we had the Tardis Titans up against the Valhalla Valkyries. Game 1, the Valks kept even pacing throughout the entirety of the early game, even getting a little bit of a lead, but one overextension after getting a Fire Giant led to a Valkyries wipe, and the Tardis Titans take game 1. Game 2 was another close one to start, but the CC and AoE damage out of the Titans overwhelmed the Valkyries for a Titans 2-0 victory. Now, talk about a bloody matchup to round out our week. The Oni Warriors and the Olympus Bolts were our final match on Sunday. And game number 1 was a slow burn, with Vote on the Warriors not really doing a whole lot in the early game, but once the objectives came around, he stepped up and helped clinch those and the game for the Oni Warriors to take the first one. Game number 2, we got a bit of a spicy pick from Veneno in the Opwash, and it paid off in dividends as he absolutely tore through the opposition, topping the damage charts for his team and helping lead the Olympus Bolts to take a game 2 over the Oni Warriors. And that momentum held into game number 3. The Bolts established an early lead, but the Warriors, no matter how far the deficit continued to go, it's the Warriors who keep bouncing back, and they hold out for 45 minutes. And despite the best efforts of Vote and the remainder of the Warriors, the Bolts, in one final team fight in the solo lane, pull through and take the set 2-1. And there you have it. Week number 7 is done. A bit of a shorter week, but still some good games nonetheless. We'll get to see the Dragons back in full force with their new jungler in week number 8, and maybe even a new face for the Solar Scarabs to see how that team rounds out as well. As far as the standings are concerned, not a whole lot has really changed up in this week. Camelot Kings still sit at the top of the charts, and that middle of the pack gets ever closer as we continue on. There's only one more week of the SPL left in Phase 2, and then we jump straight into our Masters land in just a couple of weeks. So make sure that you catch up on all the action over on our YouTube channel, SMITEPod, catch the behind the scenes over on SMITEPro, or tune in live right now on twitch.tv/SmiteGame as we kick off Week 8, the final week of Phase 2 of the SMITEPro League.